Hello and welcome to episode 2 of podcast review series. We'll jump straight in. Hope you like the first one. They'll probably get a bit smoother as they go on, but this one's on the Just Fly Performance podcast. Listen to this morning. This is Joel Smith's podcast. It's fantastic. He's a jumps and athletics coach, and it's more based around that side of things. But this was episode 17, and this was with Cal Dietz. If you don't know Cal Dietz, look, come on, man. It's probably as famous as Mike Boyle, who was the subject of the first podcast, but he basically invented triphasic training, so I've run a triphasic squat program. Triphasic meaning essentially you're going to train a block of eccentrics, possibly with super maximal phase as well, followed by isometric phase, so like a paused phase, and then a concentric phase. I use this for jumps a lot, so I would start and do eccentric squats and eccentric squat jumps with dumbbells, so dropping the dumbbells at the bottom in the first phase, and then a paused jumps phase, so a real S&C style squat jump where you squat down, pause, and then jump up with pause squats. And then the concentric phase, I just did normal squats and I did some overspeed rebound jumps. And to be honest, it was some of the best gains I've ever made in squats and jumps. So that's something for you there, just straight off the bat, triphasic. Look into that. I think the premise of it was to work all three types of muscle contraction. And he dedicated a phase to each of them. Now, Cal Dietz has changed S&C forever. He was a big influence on French contrast training, which I'll talk about later, as well as potentiation clusters. But yeah, one of the first things he talked about was he said something about the reason why eccentrics, so slowing down an eccentric or going for an extra heavy eccentric, which is basically the lowering phase. If you think of a squat, as you're squatting down, that's the eccentric phase. It works because the actin and the myosin heads just basically get ripped open, and that's inside of the muscle. We're looking at really micro kind of cellular level muscle contraction, actin myosin heads, lock on and pull. But essentially, I did not do well in muscle physiology, so don't ask me questions about that. But they basically get ripped open, cause a lot of damage. Has been historically been shown to be pretty good very good for hypertrophy or hypertrophy, sorry, and very good for developing strength in those positions. Obviously, with eccentrics, you can load up a lot more weight than your concentric. So he actually uses super maximal training a lot, and it's essentially to build up all the tissue. So it builds not just the muscle, but tendons and ligaments as well get a good workout. And he recommends doing these pre-competition phase. So you can do this, you wouldn't want to be doing this maybe 6 weeks before competition, but you would possibly prior to that 6 weeks. There's no reason why you can't do that, and it's a great way to build the tissue up, build some resilience. But also what I found as well, and what is probably quite known, to be honest, I don't think I made this up, is that eccentrics, especially with squats and bench press and the kind of powerlifting style movements, are fantastic for learning technique. It's like doing a slow snatch or a slow clean pull. Slowing down the movement obviously gives you a chance to correct halfway. So I gave some to my powerlifter Jack today, as 10-second squat eccentric. It was a single maybe or a double, not heavy, and this was as a primer before his normal squat. Just a 10-second eccentric, so he gets to feel as he's squatting down any kind of shifts that he makes with his hips or. But yeah, Cal Dietz is big into that, and it's a good teaching tool as well. Obviously, slowing down a movement. If you were to do a snatch, for example, if you've got someone who already knows how to snatch but has some issues in their pull, why not give them slow snatch, see how they cope, see how they respond to it. You'll probably find that they use their legs a lot more, they'll feel their quads burning a lot more, which is good. But yeah, leading into 6 months, 6 weeks to competition, sorry. So we're talking about a competition phase. Cal Dietz made a lot of reference to never changing what you do. If you found something that works, never change your comp rituals 6 weeks out. And that's just intuitive. That just makes intuitive sense, to be honest. I wouldn't think of why you would, but a good example is So Devonte, who I do give, he's a sprinter. He's a 100 meter and 200 meter sprinter, and I do his S&C, and basically he had a run of competitions where he was competing nearly every week, and the session I gave him 2 days out was the same every single time, and it's because the first time he ran, the first competition he did with me, with that session beforehand, he ran a PB, and this was after about 6 weeks of working with him. He did a PB. It was wind aided, to be fair, so it wasn't legal. It was windy. So, but we kept it the same, and then he ran a 200 meter PB, and then he ran a 100 meter PB. So his 100 meter PB has gone from 11.6 to 11.31, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's phenomenal. That's an incredible improvement. And his 200 has gone down to from 23. This is absurd. It's something like 23.5 to, or 23.4 down to 22.8. I've got the data on here, but and we just kept the same day beforehand. Obviously, we changed some of the other sessions, but in terms of the literal pre-competition session, we kept it basically exactly the same. And I don't want to risk changing it. I mean, I might change it and it might be better, but I don't know if that's worth the risk, really. So that's what the off-season's for, really, but kind of that's what he was talking about. Interestingly, in terms of recovery, now this was something I had never ever thought about. This is probably going to be the big talking point of the video. Introverts, i.e. people who maybe prefer to spend a lot more time on their own, and they don't care to, they don't need to speak to loads of people. Just as a very base example, introverts recover a lot slower than extroverts. Now, you might think that sounds a little bit ridiculous, really, but it makes a bit of sense if you delve a little bit deeper. The word he used was they detoxify less, so they detox less. Now, it's not detox how you're not drinking kind of fit tea detox, but it's to do with overstimulation of the brain and the nervous system. So obviously, if you have an introvert and an extrovert and they go into the same place, if it's a really loud, busy place, the extrovert will be absolutely fine, and the introvert will be incredibly overstimulated, and that will have an effect on them, and their body will go into fight or flight in some form. I think on the flip side, if you go into an unbelievably quiet place, the introvert will be absolutely fine, but the extrovert, I think, will also be fine. So the world is not made, well, the Western world, in London anyway, it's not made for introverts. Now, I actually had this issue when I first moved here. Obviously, being where I grew up in North Yorkshire, in a very small coastal town where if I left the house, it could take me 30 seconds to walk with my dog to somewhere where you'd be absolutely silent. You wouldn't hear cars, you wouldn't hear people, you would only possibly hear animals, birds, and depending on where you were, cows and sheep. I think if you've only ever lived in London and you only grew up in London, the thought of that is probably scary or absolutely absurd. Being absolutely silent, not hearing anything is, and I think I developed into an introvert because of that, but I mean, maybe not, but I loved that silence. And coming to London, even now still, I hate people, to be honest. I just hate people. I hate talking to people. I hate being around people, and this is not people I like, but this is just general people. And you do get tired, and people don't realize how tired, but it'll get to the point where after I train in the morning with people and speaking to people, and it's all happy and jolly, when I get back, I collapse on the bed for at least 5 minutes. I just feel like I can't move, and that makes sense. So basically, extroverts have ruined introverts' lives in a way, because we can't live with them, but they can live with us easily. So, as in, extroverts can live with introverts easily, but introverts can't really live with extroverts. So that was very interesting. So I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more, into what the detoxify kind of thing is. But yeah, the final point, he talked about French contrast training, obviously, and potentiation clusters. So French contrast is a way of training speed and power essentially, And it's using complexes and contrast training together. And it's a complex of 4 exercises. It's a heavy strength exercise, followed by a heavy plyometric, followed by a speed strength exercise, followed by a kind of overspeed or a pure plyometric. So for a squat example, I give this to Devontae actually. It might be front squat, or like a heavy squat, front squat, let's say. Say we're doing front squats, we're doing a vertical kind of focus, followed by a dumbbell, like a drop jump, where you drop the dumbbells and jump, so that's kind of the heavy plyometric. You're followed by a squat jump, just with a bar, which is kind of more, or maybe like 40 kilos, that's more of the speed strength exercise. And then the final one could be a pure plyometric, like a drop jump, but not with the dumbbells, just dropping off a box and jumping, or getting yourself in the bands and having the eccentric overload. Sorry, not the eccentric overload, having the concentric emphasis, where the band actually pulls you higher so you can be quicker off the ground. And that's kind of the overspeed thing. I did it with Alex today as well, actually, the shot put. So he does shot put. We did upper body pressing one, and we did chain bench. Now we could have just done bench, but we did chain. To be fair, we did chain not just for variety, but for shoulder stability as well. We find it works quite well for him. So chain bench, followed by plyometric push-up, followed by banded dumbbell bench for slightly higher reps, which is the more kind of speed strength exercise, because you have to obviously accelerate all the way through the movement for the band as the band gets tighter. And then finally a plyometric med ball throw. So he lays on his back, I drop the ball, and he catches and throws. And that we found that works really well. You might see it on Instagram later, but that works really well for him. 3 or 4 sets. But potentiation clusters is what how Dietz developed. I believe he developed it. And he'd actually developed it from Westside and Glenn Penley a little bit, who talked about they kind of brought EMOMs over into the strength world, EMOMs being every minute on the minute. And a potentiation cluster is more of an EMOM style, and it's usually just 2 exercises, to be honest. 2 to 3 exercises in an EMOM. Now, a good example, if you look on the Just Fly website, they give is 12 singles on power clean from 65 to 85%, supersetted with a sprint, a 20-meter sprint, every minute on the minute. Now, the reason potentiation clusters might work better is that because there's less, because there's less reps, because in French contrast training, you're doing like maybe triples on a squat each time. It's only kind of 4 sets. But if you do 12 singles, it's obviously the same amount of reps. But because it's more sets, the quality of the movement is a hell of a lot better, which is very useful, actually. I didn't even think about that for potentiation clusters. So those clusters work better. So a cluster set being obviously 2 things, exercises that work hand in hand, or opposite, depending on what you're trying to work for. But so that was very interesting. So you can definitely look up French contrast training. I made a post about it on the Adapt Athletics page, which I will not link in the bio. So just type it in. It's one of the most recent ones. And then you can look into potentiation clusters as a training method for training power and speed. And then finally, I'll leave you with a little tidbit that one of the things they said was a little bit of knowledge. They said the best S&C coaches, all they do is get athletes to compensate in the best way. Okay? They basically say that no athlete is perfect, and no one moves like the technical model, because the technical model doesn't suit everybody, obviously. And this is the same in weightlifting and powerlifting, is how can you compensate the best? Now, this is what I like about my coach, Chris. Chris's programming stuff at the moment is there's a lot of rotational stuff, a lot of lateral stuff. What movement you don't have there, you will borrow somewhere else. So some other movement will borrow it and you'll compensate that way. But because we all can move very well in those, 3 planes of movement, we compensate better, I feel, and we compensate less, which means we compensate better. So yeah, get your athletes as strong as possible in all 3 planes of movement. Have a wonderful time. That's this episode 2 done.